In the coming hours, a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee in the US will hold a hearing about the potential risks of artificial intelligence. Lawmakers will ask questions to experts in the tech industry and discuss what guardrails may be necessary to consider as AI grows more prominent. Among those testifying is the CEO of OpenAI, the company behind the ChatGPT AI chatbot. The software has sparked a new arms race in the field of artificial intelligence, which has the potential to change how people work and interact with each other. Joining me now from Los Angeles, Lori Schwartz is a technology expert and the CEO and founder of StoryTech. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's great to be here.
So artificial intelligence technology is advancing so fast that some countries can't keep up when it comes to oversight of AI, and unfortunately the United States is one of those countries. How is it possible that the superpower is already behind in establishing government regulations for AI, given the dangers it poses?
I think it's a very complex situation because it is moving so fast and it literally is hard to know what to do. But I also think that the US government right now is probably missing an important role, a role that they had in the Obama administration, and that is almost a technology czar, someone who's paying attention to just these things and someone that can speak this language, because what you're having right now is a bunch of government officials running around talking to experts, but not really being authentically inside of this world. And it's a complex world. There are a lot of different things going on, and it is moving really fast.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because a lot of people in Congress don't have a clue about any of this. So what are the main risks that you see being posed by AI right now, and what regulations need to be put in place before some major damage is done?
Well, okay, so the biggest challenge with AI right now is, first, we have a world that has been trained to be afraid of technology, right? There's a lot of technophobia. So you have a lot of people really terrified, almost over the top, about what AI can do. Now, that's not saying that it isn't really scary. The real challenge with AI is that we don't know where it's going and what's going to happen with it, and that there are some bad actors out there who are going to use AI to create problems, to send out what we call deep fakes, where they're portraying a video of someone and it's not really them, or using AI to create content that's not authentic, and thereby causing millions of people to think things that aren't true. And so there's a lot of challenges with managing this fast content generation that AI can do that feels real and feels authentic, but isn't. But the other side of this is that AI is actually a fantastic tool that can help a lot of people. In any business category you name, AI is bringing a lot of services and solutions that are very positive. And so the challenge with this is, how do we manage this in a way with regulations that tapers the bad actors but still leaves it open for innovation? And that's the yin and yang of this right now, is how do you do both at the same time?
Yeah, so what is the answer to that? Because I think you highlight the biggest problem, the fear that most people have, the manipulative or deceptive AI systems that could potentially bring down an individual, a business, a large company, even perhaps a government. How do you control that?
Well, I think this is going to take many different parties from many different groups. I think we are going to need to have some government regulation. I also think that tech companies are going to need to step in harder and really manage this, really provide some guardrails for consumers and other folks that are using their solutions. And then I think the general populace is going to need to step in and make some demands as well. So when you see a piece of content, we need to know, is it authentic or not? Is this a real piece of content? And I think tech companies can help that by providing some verification processes so that we know, okay, that was a real piece of content. So I think you need a trifecta here. I think you need government, I think you need tech companies, and I think you need consumers all working together to figure this out.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. You raised the Tech Czar that President Obama had in place because, as we were talking about earlier, a lot of members of Congress are too old to really grasp what is going on here with artificial intelligence, and not having a go at their age. It's simply fact that the younger people have a better grasp of all of this. So who is equipped to put oversight in place if you've got a lot of people in Congress not really able to wrap their minds around this?
Yeah, I think that Congress needs to reach into the tech community right now and find somebody that they can work with who can speak their language, but also someone that's inside the tech community. So not a career politician, but a career technologist. And let them live outside of the Washington system, because I think the problem in the past with a lot of tech czars is that they get swallowed up in the government system, and that stops them from doing what they need to do. So somehow there needs to be a partnership with a, technologist, someone in senior leadership who can communicate what they need to communicate, but they're outside, of the government system, because they're just going to get squashed.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point. Lori Schwartz, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.